I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining today. For my quick little presentation, I'll try to not take up too much of your time. The topic for me is to discuss sort of my contribution journey in the Drupal community, stuff that I've worked on, but sort of my takeaways from contribution itself and how I really use that as a tool for learning new things, learning more about Drupal, but about development in general, and something that I think can benefit a lot of people if you haven't been contributing already and aren't sure what your path might be in the community, in open source in general, and to really encourage you to sort of take that journey if you haven't started already. Okay? A little bit about me. My name is David Hernandez. I've been at FFW for 5 years now, 4 or 5 years. I've been working with Drupal for about 12 years, I would say, 2008, give or take. And I've been contributing since at least, a little bit after that time, a few years, and sort of hardcore contributing during the early phases of Drupal 8's lifecycle. I had over 100 issue credits prior to Drupal 8's release, just as an indication of sort of knowledge and involvement I had in the beginning as Drupal was really starting to get itself towards alpha release and beta release, and then the final release, which was a really exciting time because there was a lot of movement and a lot of features being developed and everything was moving pretty fast. During that process, I've worked a lot on the theme system. So during my career, I've spent a lot of time doing front-end development, so it was a natural fit for me to work on that kind of stuff when I got involved in Drupal. So trolling around the theme system and the core themes themselves, helping out, I slotted in there pretty easily and spent a lot of time working with the theme development team. So because of that, I was around during the early phases when a lot of the base themes were first created in Drupal 8, classy and stable, and a lot of the changes to the theme system, creating new templates so that we can start using Twig instead of PHP templates, so getting rid of that old system. And because of that, I was made maintainer of the classy base theme, which is in Drupal now. Still there in Drupal 9, but slated to likely get removed by Drupal 10, because it sort of served its purpose and moving on in the way we do things. So in my role at FFW, as I said, I'm a senior front-end developer. I do a lot of front-end work, but also some back-end work. And I'm the manager of learning contributions, which means I'm basically the main technical trainer that works here at FFW. We do a fair amount of technical training for our clients, paid training, but also for clients that we build sites for and do whatever they need, documentation and training, assistance for their stakeholders, content editors, and things like that, as well as developers. So I've done straight developer training, technical training, as well as certification prep for developers. You can find me at david.hernandez@ffwagency.com, and you can find me on Drupal.org as David Hernandez, all one word. Feel free to contact me at any time on either one of those. Any Drupal space, we tend to always use our usernames. So you'll find me on Slack as well as David Hernandez, all one word, and a few other places the same. Okay. Just a little bit about us. These are the standard slides we always do. We're a full-service digital agency. We're pretty large. FFW is worldwide. We have offices in Asia, Europe, North America. We have a lot of developers. We have a lot of experience. We've been doing this for a very long time. FFW and the core of the units of FFW, people there have been probably involved in Drupal since almost the beginning. So we're certainly well experienced with a lot of the technology around it. We are deeply committed to contributing to Drupal. FFW spent a lot of money and a lot of time supporting the project. We're always been a top level signature partner. We have a lot of developers that work on Drupal and Drupal core. We have, I believe, the most certified developers of any Drupal agency, like 170, something like that, and working on more. We always maintain ourselves in at least the top 10 for contributions. If you check out the services page for the rankings of all the organizations, we always try to stay up there because we spend a lot of time working on code and contributing. And so we do get credit for that, and it's nice to maintain our place there. And I'm going to go over some of those things related to that, like how does that happen? Is it something that we just do, or does it happen naturally, or do you really push for it? What are all the different things that are involved in that process? And then something that I think we actually don't get a lot of credit for, and a lot of organizations don't, is how much we actually contribute to things like community-related events and training. We've supported global training days pretty much like every year that it's existed. We're always top supporters for different Drupal camps and events that go on. A lot of our people get involved with organizing events and participating in governance groups and all kinds of other things. And those are things that are not easy to see show up on like commit credits and things like that. So we definitely do participate in pretty much everything that Drupal has to offer as far as the community goes. Our service offering, we are a full service agency, obviously, but we're not just a development shop. We have digital strategists that get themselves involved in pretty much every phase of a digital project for clients, design, analytics, and of course, training. I am one of the professional trainers, so we have a full service training offering, if you need technical training, project management training, and so forth. Okay, our client list, obviously, the portfolio is pretty broad, with a lot of big names, heavy hitters, Pfizer, NBC, Panasonic, things like that. But we do work with a lot of mid-sized organizations, universities, things like that as well. Okay, so my agenda for today, it's fairly simple. It's not going to be a super long presentation, but what I want to go over are just sort of a description of what my journey has been through this process and how I got started, how I've learned, my takeaways, and how I think contributing has helped me professionally. So I think we often look at contribution as just how we give back, but I think that process itself has a lot of benefits on its own, and it helps me learn about Drupal, learn how to keep up to date with all the changes that exist in Drupal, as well as changes that are going on in the community itself. So I want to discuss all of that, but that starts somewhere, which was sort of a path for me. What would be really nice is if you who are listening have your own particular journey, your own particular starting points. If you list those, bring that up in the chat and we can communicate with each other. I think that'd be really great for people to just share that experience with other people so that that there's different journeys involved, not just mine. Okay, then I want to discuss contribution from a development standpoint. I'm not going to go into like code and details related to that. It's more the stuff that I've been discussing already, like what are some of the benefits, what can you get out of it, what are some lessons that you've learned related to strictly the development side of things. Then I want to do the same thing to discuss sort of education and training. What are some things that you can do that are besides just code, and what can you learn that isn't just code. I know there's a lot of technical people here, but there's a lot of non-technical people in the community as well. And there's a lot of non-technical things to do even for the technical people, public speaking and documentation, all kinds of stuff related to it. And how is this actually going to help you in any way, as opposed to you just giving? And then I'm going to discuss how to keep up. I have some resources that I'll provide. The keeping up, I think, is going to be a thread that's sort of woven into everything here in the presentation. So I'm not just leaving it for the end. But I think this is really an important aspect of contribution, and the main benefit that I get out of it is keeping up with all of the developments that's going on right now. It's very difficult to know what things are happening, what changes occur, where they come from, why, until they suddenly just show up in your lap when Drupal 9 gets released, and you're like, what is all this stuff? What happened? Why is this stuff gone? What stuff has been added? But if you're always involved in the process while it's going on year after year, you're always in the loop, so none of these things are surprises, right? So a little bit about my journey. When I got started in Drupal, so yeah, this is like 2007, 2008. I didn't really do much as far as contribute. I was moving over from IT, system administration, to someone that was managing a website, and I needed to basically just learn how to use it, download Drupal, install it, get it set up, and have it be the CMS that I was going to use. So I just started my process being a user who had a need, which was try to learn how to use this piece of software and figure out what it could do for me, right? And I think most people that you encounter are always going to start that way. That's just a natural part of the process, and it doesn't bother me when we encounter new people and they're like, well, I'm only doing this because I have a specific use case or I have something that I'm trying to do. I think that's where we all get started. So we should be able to empathize with that process and where those people are coming from before sort of like dumping the baggage on them. Like, well, you needed to contribute back as well in order to get something out of it or to get from me. No, we're all going to start from the same place, which is we have a need, and then everything we start doing is going to be driven by trying to satisfy that particular need. So for me, what I then did, which was a great first step, is I had a local user group that started near me in the New Jersey area where I'm from. And I was able to go there to learn from other people who were more experienced than me, right? But in that process, I met people. I made friends, but I learned things from presentations that other people were giving. I learned that there were other people that were in similar situations to me. I learned that there were other people that were in different situations from me. I gained new perspectives. And this is all just me sort of like consuming information from other people. Well, seeing that and seeing these other people sort of set the example, I then decided it would be a good idea to pay it forward and do some of these things as well. But I didn't know how to contribute the code in the way they did. I wasn't a particularly good developer. I'm still getting started with a lot of these things. So what is it that I do? So what I did was help in areas that I knew would be useful for other people that weren't necessarily technical. So instead of contributing code, I did things like help organize the user group. And then I started to help organize conferences and other things like that. And then I transitioned that into also speaking at these events, which I think is a great first step for anyone. I'll get into some of that later, about how public speaking can really help you learn all of the details of a particular area that you're trying to speak about. And that, to me, is a great form of contribution that we don't talk about enough. Is you're essentially sharing your knowledge with other people and helping them in any way you can. So I did a lot of that, and then I got involved in Drupal Governance, which was organizing for different areas, but also getting involved with the Drupal Association and things like that. And it wasn't actually until I did all of these things that I then started getting more involved in code contribution, because I figured, all right, it's time for me to like step it up. Drupal 8 is really getting into full swing. I should contribute along with this as well. I'm a developer. I can do some of this stuff. It was just always really intimidating. So I found myself gravitating towards these other areas because I was intimidated by the code and some of the people involved. And like, oh, they must all be better than me, right? There's no way that I can contribute to this. So it just took a little while for me to sort of like dip my toe and just get involved and start to feel comfortable and understand that there were things that I could do and things that I could learn. And there were a lot of really helpful people there to sort of guide me along the way. Right? And all of this has led to the greatest benefit, which is just improving your skills as a developer or a designer or whoever I'm so much better at what I do now because not just using Drupal, but because I've been contributing to Drupal and I'm learning all this stuff about PHP and JavaScript, but also how Drupal itself works, all of its systems, how to just do site building, how to work better on a team, how to work better with people that are new, that I don't know, how to communicate better, all this. Okay. All right, so what are some development aspects involved in this? So there are a few things that I really point out as far as taking your skills to the next level. A big one for me has been accessibility, because if you were like me or in roles that I've had in the past with other organizations, oftentimes you might be the only developer there, or you might be on a small technical team of developers. You often don't have like an accessibility expert around who is somebody that knows exactly what they're doing and can tell you exactly how to do it. And accessibility itself over the past few years had changed dramatically in the way things are done and what was supported and how things work beyond just simple screen readers. Much of my knowledge of accessibility has come from Drupal. It's working with a lot of the great people that are involved who are experts. So they're accessibility experts who maintain or provide the accessibility gate inside of Drupal core, who will block issues and not allow them to be committed unless they're properly accessible. And that learning experience is pretty fundamental to picking up these skills, because we all know that when you don't have this expertise and you're in a position where you're thinking, or the client won't pay for like the extra hours to make things accessible, how do you even develop those skills? How do you really work that into your development process when you feel that you don't have the time? Well, usually what happens is you have to develop the skill, and then once you have the skill, you can figure out how to fit it into the work that you're already doing from the ground up. It's not necessarily extra hours, you really just need the knowledge. Well, when you're not already doing it, it can be difficult to develop that skill. So having this other project where there's experts around who can help you and help you develop those skills and give you the right answers really pushed me to another level in understanding how these things work. And they're all, to an individual, incredibly nice and helpful people that you really find nicer people than those who work in the area of accessibility. They know how hard this is, and they are thankful for any help they can possibly get. Modernizing PHP, same thing. I think a lot of us in open source and in the Drupal community that I've known, and this is, for me, this is true in IT in general, or not always, or most of them are not the kind of people that just came out of grad school with a master's degree in computer science. We're all people who got here in different ways, and we have different levels of skills, and we learn the things we need to learn about. And so when we started doing Drupal 8 development, one of those things was using modern PHP for like object-oriented development. A lot of people weren't doing it, and Drupal 7 doesn't have it very much at all. But with Drupal 8, that had to be done. So people had to figure it out. And not all the right decisions were made, but a lot of good ones were. And as you are contributing and developing this other project that's different than any client work you do, same thing, you start to learn these things. So I had to learn a lot about object-oriented programs that I didn't know before and that I didn't need for my work. But once I developed those skills, once they then show up in the work that I'm actually doing, it's so much easier. I could say the same thing about JavaScript, and modernizing JavaScript is something that we're starting to do now with making Drupal either more React or Vue.js compatible for administrative interfaces and things like this. If it's not something that you do every day on your own projects, if you work in core development and assist in doing this, you'll develop those skills. And it's a great place to kind of learn because it's something new even for Drupal. So it's not like anyone's going to show up and say, no, you can't do it that way. That's not the right way. Like people in Drupal that are working on this core are trying to figure out what that way is. So anyone who can experiment or find new techniques or just do something that works and then we figure it out later. Like that's kind of the way where development often works. Testing is the same way. There's so many people I run into that don't do testing, and by that I mean like using PHP units, functional testing, whatever that may be. That's something that's crucial to Drupal core development. So if it's not something you do now, it's a great place to learn. So many features that are added or bugs that are fixed will require tests being either modified or added, things like that. And so that becomes a new skill for you to use. And it's incredibly important, especially if you're working on a larger project and not just small sites that you might build quickly. The larger, more robust enterprise level ones usually require a strong testing framework on them. So it's a good skill to have. Git and Composer, same thing. I'm always surprised by the number of people that show up and want to contribute, say, at a sprint and don't have these skills, or maybe using Git for the first time. But yeah, obviously we use it for everything. And so you can start to develop those skills if you don't have them already and then bring them into your work. A Composer is something that we had to do just as an absolute need when Drupal 8 was in development. So like, was it 4 or 5 years ago, Composer was not really widespread and Drupal had to kind of like jump on board really quickly. And in that process, I didn't just like learn how to use Composer. I learned about all of the things that made Drupal really bad in Composer because of like the fundamental structure. And these are all problems that are being worked on and fixed. It's not that Drupal did anything wrong. It's just that Drupal itself is a fully contained project. It's not a library. So working with Composer, a lot of things have to just be done in a completely different way. But trying to figure out those problems, I developed a better understanding for things like autoloaders, which I didn't spend a lot of time like figuring out and like fundamentally understand how that works, so I can understand what Composer was trying to do and like putting its files in certain places and getting things wrong. All right, so these are the kinds of things you can do that you have a place where you can learn. It's not just about doing work. It's a place where you can expand and learn different things and have a lot of people that are around who can help you through it. Right? So newer technologies, as I was saying, with the development skills, there's a lot of things you can start working on that maybe you haven't touched before because Drupal has its own particular problems it's going to solve, but also a lot of other people involved that are not in your normal organization. All right, so the last bullet point I put here is about like avoid falling into the same old traps. I think we all do this in the jobs that we have, in the organizations that we're in, the teams that we're in. We tend to do things the same way and not necessarily get pushed out of that pattern because we've all got budgets and we've got deadlines and all that. So we're always thinking like, well, I know how to do this way. We already have scripts and build tools that are built that way. The technology is already there. Let's just keep doing it that way, just so that we can get it done. So it's very easy for us to stay into that trap. But when you contribute to something like Drupal, you're kind of pulled out of that, right? It's not just a different website or a different project. You're putting yourself into a whole different organization, right? Like your boss is not there, your team is not there. It's a whole other group of people. And those people will bring different things in to that development process, like tools that you haven't used before, different techniques you haven't used before, that they use in their organization, or maybe they're experimenting with just something completely different and new. And this is your opportunity to start learning some of those things, right? So like some of the JavaScript testing frameworks I hadn't used before, like Nightwatch, but that was needed for Drupal to start doing JavaScript testing. So it's just like a cool new thing to learn about, and then you can bring it into your work and like, oh yeah, well, we can do that. I learned how to do that. I started playing around with post CSS because it's something that's being used in Drupal 9 now. And I think that's something that I pull into my client work, and I'm starting to advance some of the things that I'm doing and leave behind some of the older stuff that I think we don't need necessarily anymore. Right, there's ways to get around some of like those older traps that we've been in with technology and techniques and things like that. I think you have to develop a comfort level outside of your normal day job so that you can then feel comfortable bringing it in and advance what you're doing. And this is a continuous process. This goes on all the time. and it covers everything. So I put IDEs in there because like working with Drupal contribution was the first time where I started using PHP Storm and learning about all the object-oriented tools that are built into it. I fell into those same traps of like, well, I'll just keep using Sublime Text or one of these other plain text editors. I know Sublime Text can do some of the things PHP Storm does, but like just forcing myself to not just always be doing things the same way, I was really pushed by other people outside my organization to do that. Okay. Undiscovered areas. This I think is a great benefit for when you start learning all of the really details within Drupal of the system itself. Drupal has a lot of subsystems and features, and most of them are probably things that you don't ever use. So for me, for the longest time, I never used the translation or internationalization system. But I started learning how to use it simply because I occasionally worked on some issues like patches, bug fixes, things like that, and working with people who might ask for help on how to do something, and they were working on something in the translation system. So over time, I started, at least at like an amateur level, understanding how the system works, and then lo and behold, when I started working at FFW, we do have lots of clients with sites that require translation, internationalization. So I felt comfortable, at least a bit in that system before I even got started. I didn't feel like I had to start from zero and learn this entire subsystem. And there's a lot of stuff like that inside of Drupal that you probably don't touch on a regular basis, but through your contribution efforts, you'll start to learn all the particulars, like where every configuration screen is, what every option actually does, because at some point you had to click all the buttons to like test something, right? And so now you go into your client work feeling confident that like you're aware of what all the options are, what everything does, and what solutions might be necessary to solve specific problems because you've kind of already been there and you figured out what things exist. A lot of these systems are, I think, underutilized, but we're going to start seeing them more and more. So something like the Symfony-based event system that Drupal has, I had to learn about that on an occasional bug, but also for the training development that I do, which I'll get into just after this. The event system is probably something that's going to replace Drupal's hook system, right, or at least part of it, and being comfortable with that from the beginning before that even gets started, you can help replace those hooks and work on the development, but you're also comfortable with the way that system works. So as it gets replaced over time, if it doesn't get replaced over time, you don't feel like you're lost and that this thing is just dumped in your lap and you have a completely new way you have to do everything. If you've been involved in that process all along, you're just already comfortable with it. So education and training, this is something that I do on a regular basis. Is that I am a professional trainer that works here at FFW, but I consider a lot of things to be part of this whole education realm, things like public speaking and documentation and all that. And these are all things that are not just stuff to do, but I think are an important part of contribution. So non-code contributions, documentation, it is underrated. One of the biggest complaints when Drupal 8 came out was people saying that the documentation wasn't good enough. And you even had, I think, core developers who were like, oh, we wrote all the documentation, it's there. And everyone was like, no, it's not good enough. Like, I don't understand it, or it's not up to date, or it's not telling me what it is I need to know. And I've seen that myself where I've read some very verbose documentation pages on Drupal 8 that just are confusing, even to me, and like, I know how the system works. So for someone that maybe doesn't contribute as much or have as much knowledge, documentation is actually one of the best places to be because you provide a perspective of someone who up until very recently probably didn't understand how this thing worked, right? And so you're usually better at explaining it because you're going to explain it in a way that you wish had been explained to you when you first got started. Whereas the people who built this system tend to just explain it in a very technical way, in a way that like makes it clear you almost have to understand it before you read the documentation, and that's not the best for somebody who's new. Blogs are great for contributing. You don't always see those. It's not going to show up in an issue queue on Drupal.org, but it's knowledge sharing. So if you're doing that, That's great. And I find that doing it helps me because, as with documentation, you have to understand when you decide you're going to go ahead and write that blog post or that piece of documentation, it makes you then go and like look at all the options and make sure you fully understand that system before you dare like go write something about it. And sometimes still you can write a blog post and maybe be wrong about it. But someone might provide that feedback. So somebody might read your blog post and ask you a question or tell you something like, oh, I didn't understand this part. Oh, I apparently wrote that wrong, or I got it wrong. I was wrong about that option. And that helps you as a developer because somebody just corrected you. And like, oh, now I understand that system better and I can do my work better. Right? Helping people is underrated. So we do have an extremely large Slack for Drupal that I actually help admin with thousands of people in it. And one of the best ways to help people is just by being there, by being a presence and answering questions when you can, or even just helping assist conversations, whatever is necessary at the time. I think there are some people, and I'm one of them, that tend to often get more out of talking to a person than just reading a blog post or documentation or watching a video. I'm often terrible at those things, but like if I have someone sitting next to me for 5 minutes that I can ask questions to, I'll get all the answers that I need. I'm good at answering questions or asking questions to get the information I need as opposed to just trying to read some document. And then, as it says, sharing knowledge 101, go to local events and not just meet people, but you can gain perspectives from people that are there. They will share with you and you share with them. So you're contributing just by being present. I know that I give a lot of talks at local meetup groups, and I'd rather have a talk with like 50 people there than with 6 people there, even if most of those 50 people aren't saying anything or doing anything. Just the fact that they're there and that they were interested and I knew that that was worth my time is a big boost for people who do public speaking. Okay. So public speaking, I really encourage people to do this, to get started with it, even if you think it's not necessarily something that you want to do or you're scared of it. Like, don't be, just go do it. Start at a local user group where there are just 5 people that are there. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything about the topic because that's how you'll get better. So you can do that in local user groups. Webinars now, because we're doing so much online instead of in person because of the current situation. But in the past, I've done webinars, camps, conferences, everything. And this is a great tool for improving your communication skills, but also improving, as I've said before, your breadth of knowledge as well as your depth of knowledge, because people know that when they're going to go talk about a particular topic, especially something technical, you are going to go learn more than you already know because you're going to have to answer questions, but you want to make sure that you are providing all the details, all of the options that might be necessary. You start hunting down like why certain things are the way they are just so that you can talk about it. And this has, I would say, helped me tremendously just in my regular work because developing better communication skills helps you just talk to people better. It helps you organize your thoughts better, be more articulate, understanding how to speak to different audiences. So, you're not just a developer always talking to a developer. You've got project managers, you've got clients, you've got all kinds of different people, different audiences that you have to communicate with. If you can form your thoughts and communicate them in different ways to different people, that's just going to make you better at the job that you're doing, which for me is working on a team building websites, right? I have lots of different people I need to talk to, and I don't talk to them just in one way. I think that makes me weaker as a team member if I'm only capable of doing something one way. So training, I do this professionally, but I've also done this, we've done a lot of free trainings, but I've done training even before at FFW for things like camps and conferences and local user groups and just like helping people learn Drupal or helping them learn other things. Training people as just an activity to contribute, like public speaking, helps you learn the material because you know there's that certain fear factor that I now have to train somebody how to do this, so I better go look into it and make sure I understand all of the details of how this thing works. And that's, for me, is a great motivator for making sure that I understand what I'm doing. And every time I've done a client training, I've learned more about Drupal 8 in some areas after Drupal 8 was released, and I completed most of the work that I was going to do on it from training, because I then had to like go into a system and like make examples to show other people and explain how this thing works. And I really didn't know, so I had to go start digging through all this kind of stuff. It's a great way to keep up with changes because Drupal 8 keeps changing, and I can't give a training on Drupal like 8.8 that's the same as Drupal 8.0. There are certain things that don't work the same way. Certain bugs that have been fixed, certain bugs that show up. There are certain features that have been added, new ways of doing certain things, new requirements in certain subsystems, just like all kinds of different things. So you have to kind of pay attention. And while I'm writing training materials, I often find that like I find when all the deprecated code is there, because it shows up because I'm poking around in areas that maybe I don't normally poke around for client work. Right? Learning new perspectives is great because again, I'm talking to lots of different people. So if you were to like contribute by creating your own training for like beginners of Drupal, what you're going to have is a bunch of people who are new show up, and you're going to spend a lot of time with them, sitting down and talking to them, and you might learn things from them that they bring that you haven't considered, like different kinds of projects that have different sort of requirements that you haven't considered before. And so you're not just helping them, you have an entire room full of people that are probably helping you and help drive you to the next level by just introducing you to subject matters that maybe you haven't considered before. Right? And with that, so I have two links here, one for this Composer tutorial and this Drupal 8 object-oriented programming tutorial that I've developed. I like to show people that. I've given talks on each one of them before. They're tutorials that I originally developed for exactly what I'm talking about. I had to give trainings on Drupal 8 object-oriented programming, and I said, all right, I need to understand all the details of how this stuff works. Like, where did these things come from, and how do I get this particular area to work? Like, why is this written the way it's written? Why is it named the way it's named? And so I actually had answers to a number of those questions because I had the historical knowledge behind it, but then I had to develop also a lot more of the technical knowledge that I didn't have. And building these tutorials to help people is a really great benefit for me. I feel like I've probably benefited more from that than anybody else who actually uses them. Okay. So keeping up, what are some things that I actually do to keep up, as we said, with the moving drop with Drupal, and probably this is the same for really any open source project. I consider contributing as an advantage in this area. If you just contribute by itself and you don't read documentation or keep up on social media or talk to people or anything that's going on, you already have an advantage. Right, you're going to know about the new features that are being developed, right? Because you're there while it's happening. Even if you're not working on them, you'll see them show up. They'll just be part of the commit logs and part of work that you're doing because you might have to adjust to something that's being done there. You'll learn about all the things that are being deprecated. And this is something that I've done often in my training, where I have an example for something that I do. And then I suddenly realized, because I'm using a slightly newer version of Drupal now, that that code that I wrote is now deprecated. So I then go look at what replaces it. And now I've learned something new, and probably something new that I can put into my training materials. Change records are, and I'll get into this in the next slide, there's an entire list of all change records that get produced for Drupal core. And it's an extremely long list. So over Drupal 8's lifecycle, and there's like 40 pages or something of change records. So I'll provide the link for that, and it's a great place to really know about all the detailed code related things, like when some feature changes some piece of code, like don't use this anymore, you're gonna have to use it like this. And mostly everything that's in the change record is like, okay, in the next version of Drupal, that old thing you're doing is gonna go away. So you need to know like what had changed. Contributing helps you understand where the landmines are in Drupal. This has been a big thing for me, doing certain things like there are certain bugs that still sort of persist that maybe will always stick around for a while and don't get fixed, but you learned where those are by contributing, because there might be a bug that you're working on that still hasn't gotten committed, which I have a few of those. And then you just know about that when you're doing your client work, right? So even when you're speccing something out, you know, like, okay, don't assume that that's going to work correctly that way, because I know there's an issue that exists there, right? Or you know that like just using a feature the way it's intended, but like in a particular use case might actually be problematic, and you find out some of those things before they ever happen just by contributing and being really deep within Drupal and all of its use cases. And as I said, for me, this is crucial for making decisions on client projects, because I learn about all of these different things that I might need to avoid. But also just in general, contributing has taught me so much about how Drupal works that I make decisions all the time that are entirely focused on just knowledge I already have, but not knowledge I've already used for a client project, right? So it's a lesson that I already learned before I actually need to know it, right? And the same thing for maintenance, right? So when Drupal 9 comes out, it already has come out, but like you don't have to look at it as like just this new thing that fell in your lap. It's now something that you're already completely familiar with, right? That familiarity in all these areas is key. It's not going to shock you. It's not going to surprise you. You just go along with the flow. You know exactly what you might have to modify, and hopefully, as you know, if you've been a part of this whole process, when like deprecations occur, things like that, you've already been dealing with them in Drupal 8. So when 9 shows up, you have to do very little. Right? That's an enormous advantage when it comes to your maintenance on client projects, because you don't have that huge worry, that huge risk factor that like you're going to now update something and something really disastrous happens, and you realize that you have to do a whole lot of work to change maybe the way something works, something that you were doing, and get used to something new. Like that's a bandage you have to rip off very quickly, and it might be a really painful one. So doing all of that ahead of time and staying involved helps you avoid that completely. The other thing I learned is there is no real right way for a lot of things. There are certain best practices, but I think a lot of people get themselves wrapped up in like that there is a perfect way to do something, or like this is a good way and that is the bad way. Like I've had people say things where like, well, if you're a professional, you would only do it like this. You would never do it like that. Or like only, you know, professional developer would only use these tools and not those tools or whatever. And like I've worked with so many people and doing so many different things that you learn over time. It's like, does it work? All right, then that was the right way. You know, like if it didn't work, then it's not the right way. You have to be careful about just understanding your use cases and you know what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish, not live up to some ideal that really doesn't matter for you. And so working with all of these great people, I've basically had the confidence to sort of like fight that and learn that like, yeah, these people are doing that too. Like that's okay. I don't have to feel insecure about that. And honestly, not always scratching your own itch. We have a tendency to really only ever work on things that we need, right? And which makes sense, because if it's, you know, your day job and your client project, you're only going to work on what they're paying you to work on, right? So how do you develop a lot of these new skills, or how do you develop new features? Or well, scratching an itch that isn't yours is how you do that. So there's a lot of times where I want to contribute and I work with someone else, like a friend of mine who's contributing something, so we're in a module, or there's some issue in Drupal core that needs attention. You might decide to just go in and do it. And I encourage people to do that. Like, don't just work on things that you think you already know. If you think you might at least have some of the skills to solve the problem, don't worry about it being in an area of Drupal that you don't use or serving a use case that you don't have. This is how you learn about those use cases and develop the skills that are necessary to, you know, solve those use cases. And then when they show up in your client project, it's like, lo and behold, you already know how to do that thing. Right? You'd be really surprised what you get introduced to that you may like and enjoy doing, be really fruitful for you moving forward. Right? So don't always fall into that same trap. Some resources. So I hear from people sometimes when they want to contribute or just learn about Drupal and keep up with all the changes. They'll do things like look at commit logs or go look at the issue queue itself to see what's going on, and that's kind of the worst way to do it. Right? Don't get yourself lost in the issue queue if you don't know exactly what it's looking for. It's just like a giant open chasm. What you want to do instead are, if you're just trying to keep up with changes, or do things like the change records. And that's the URL there. So drupal.org/list-changes/Drupal. This will list all of the change records for Drupal core. And there is filtering and search capabilities in there. So if you just want to look at a particular system, subsystem, you can do that, because there are a lot of change records. So there's like 40 pages of change records for Drupal 8's life, and Drupal 9 might be included in that as well. So if you're working on something and something they have changed in a way that you don't understand, like code that used to work doesn't work now, go in there and search for that code inside the change record. You might see that someone changed something at some point and changed it for the better. Usually that's why we have those change records. So you can learn about all the things that are changing. Online resources. So for social media, there are a few Twitter accounts that I follow. Drupal 8 Changes is a Twitter account that tweets those change records. So if you're interested in doing that as kind of a filter, you don't want to go to that webpage all the time to look for stuff. Whenever a new change record shows up, it tweets it out. So you can just read the description and see if it's something that you're interested in. The Drupal infrastructure groups, that's Drupal_infra. I would encourage almost anybody to follow. That's a group it's basically the technical staff from the Drupal Association who are going to provide updates for anything related to infrastructure. So like when Drupal.org is down, that's the Twitter account that will tweet about it and let you know when it's back up, things like that. Drupal Security is a Twitter account for the security team. That's a good one to follow because they will tweet every time there's a security advisory or anything else that's really important to the Drupal community in the security world. So if something outside of strictly Drupal is happening, they might tweet something about it. So they're good to follow. And then there's this Twitter account called Drop is Moving, which is one that often tweets things related to major changes that are going on inside Drupal, and they retweet and things like that. So if you're interested in keeping up with some community news, they might be a good resource for you. And then the newsletter that a lot of us follow is the Weekly Drop. So you can go to theweeklydrop.com. They put out a regular newsletter, but it contains more than just information you'll get from Drupal.org. So they will post blog posts in their newsletter and things like major releases that occur for different software projects. So if a particular module has a major release, they will actually put it in the newsletter. And that's really nice because it's often things that are not on Drupal.org. So a lot of the development tools that get updated, if you're using any of the Docker tools or like Drupal VM and things like that, like if they have major releases, the Weekly Drop will post something about that in there. So that's a great way for you to keep up to date on things that are going on. Right. And then my favorite resources, as I mentioned earlier, are just people. Right. I think that's where I get most of my best information. So go to meetups if you can. Current situation is obviously preventing that for a lot of people, but what my local group has been doing is having all our meetups online. And we don't, we just do presentations like this through, we've been using Zoom calls and trying different things like that. So getting that interaction where you're live and can ask people questions and talk to people, I think is still beneficial. We need to keep doing that online as much as possible, but we can't do it in person. And I think that might actually end up long-term being better for us because I know local meetups are tough for a lot of people just travel-wise because there may not be one that's particularly close to you. And if we're thinking online first, I think that opens up these meetups to a lot more people than we have in the past. Slack, as I said, we have a rather large Slack with thousands of people in it. If you go to Drupal.org/Slack, you can find the link for registering an account and logging in and see the list of the admins that are there. I'm one of them. And we have a huge number of Slack channels that are available. So just if you want to just be there, you can always ask questions. There's questions that you can ask in channels specific to contributing to different areas of Drupal core. but also if you just want to get help from anyone, there's a number of channels. Usually everyone there is pretty open for helping other people out. So then friends and coworkers obviously are a great resource. And then lastly, just me. Every time I give a presentation, I always give people my contact info. I'm always available wherever the Drupal community is. If somebody wants to reach out to me directly, you want to email me or find me on Slack, wherever. I'm totally open to that if you just have questions. If you want to know more about contributing or just about the community in general, and you just need advice, I think it's important for a lot of us who've been around for a very long time to sort of serve as mentors and just help people on their journey, because that makes us better and it makes the community better and it makes the software better because we're introducing more people to it, and those people will always make us stronger and provide things that maybe we can't. So it's good to help people when they're new, because you were new too and you needed help, and I know I needed a lot of help when I was new. So I'm more than willing to give back. So that's it for me. Thank you for joining. As I said, if you have anything that you want to post in the chat, please do. So if you have any questions, feel free to